The emergency klaxon's wail pierced through the Meridian's usually serene corridors like a banshee with particularly poor timing. Dr. Elena Vasquez nearly spilled her morning coffee, real coffee, not the synthetic swill the replicators produced, all over her xenobiology reports as the ship lurched violently to starboard. "Computer, status report," she called out, steadying herself against her desk. "Solar storm intensity exceeding predicted parameters by 400%. Neural dampening field fluctuations detected in Containment Bay 7. All non-essential systems switching to emergency power." Elena's blood ran cold. Containment Bay 7 housed their most recent acquisition, Subject 247, the humanoid they'd found unconscious on the surface of Kepler 442b 3 days ago. The neural dampeners were the only thing keeping their mysterious guest in a medically induced coma while the xenobiology team ran their preliminary scans. She grabbed her tablet and sprinted down the corridor, her lab coat billowing behind her like a caffeinated superhero's cape. The ship groaned around her as the storm battered their shields, causing the lights to flicker ominously. Elena had always found it ironic that humanity could traverse the galaxy but still couldn't build a light fixture that didn't have a panic attack during bad weather. The containment bay doors hissed open, revealing a scene that made Elena's heart skip several important beats. The medical bed was empty, its restraints dangling uselessly like the arms of a deflated scarecrow. Across the room, a figure crouched on top of the equipment locker with the grace of a jungle cat, if jungle cats had pointed ears that could have been used to receive satellite television. Subject 247 was awake, and she was magnificent. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Elena could see that their captive was undeniably female and breathtakingly beautiful in an otherworldly way. Her skin held a subtle luminescence that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, and her hair fell in silver waves to her shoulders. But it was her eyes that stopped Elena cold. They shifted from deep violet to burning amber as she noticed the doctor's arrival. "Ah," the being said in accented but perfect English, her voice carrying musical undertones that seemed to resonate in Elena's chest. "The keeper arrives." "You can speak," Elena breathed, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "I can do many things," the woman replied, uncoiling from her perch with fluid grace. "Including this." She leaped from the locker, executed a perfect somersault in midair, and landed in a crouch near the door controls. Her fingers danced over the panel with impossible speed, and Elena heard the locks engaging with a decisive click. "I'm not your pet," she growled, whirling to face Elena with those color-shifting eyes now blazing like twin suns. Elena held up her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm Dar. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist. I'm not here to hurt you." The woman tilted her head, those remarkable ears twitching slightly. "Your thoughts say otherwise, doctor. You think of specimen containers and tissue samples. Your mind tastes of curiosity seasoned with clinical detachment." Elena blinked. "You're telepathic. And you're observant. Perhaps there's hope for your species yet." The woman circled Elena like a predator, but there was something almost playful in her movements. "I am Kira of the Scifistories, daughter of wind and starlight, and I will not be poked and prodded like some laboratory rodent." "The Scifistories," Elena repeated, her scientific mind cataloging this new information. "We've never heard of your people. Because we are smarter than to advertise our existence to a species that dissects first and asks questions later." Kira paused her circling, studying Elena with renewed interest. "Though you are different. Your mind lacks the sharp edges of cruelty I've felt from the others." Elena felt a strange warmth at what she assumed was a compliment, though coming from someone who could apparently read her thoughts, it felt oddly intimate. "The others? The ones who found me. Metal thoughts, cold hearts. They dream of fame and fortune built on my bones." Kira's expression darkened, and Elena caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the defiant exterior. The ship lurched again, and both women grabbed for support. Kira's hand briefly touched Elena's, and the contact sent an electric tingle up the doctor's arm. Their eyes met for a moment, and Elena saw recognition flicker across Kira's features. You're not like them, Kira said softly, then immediately seemed annoyed with herself for the admission. Her eyes flashed back to Amber, and she stalked toward the room's small kitchenette. What manner of torture device is this? Elena followed her gaze to the food dispenser, fighting back a smile. It's a replicator. It creates food. Creates? Kira poked at the interface with one finger, as if expecting it to bite her. Your people have achieved the power of creation. Well, not exactly. It rearranges matter at the molecular level too. Witchcraft, Kira declared solemnly, then promptly ordered a sandwich. When the dispenser hummed to life and produced a perfectly symmetrical grilled cheese, she recoiled as if the machine had just materialized a three-headed snake. This is geometrically impossible sustenance. No living thing grows in perfect squares. Elena couldn't help herself, she laughed. It started as a small chuckle but grew into full-blown laughter at the sight of this magnificent, otherworldly being treating a sandwich like an eldritch abomination. You mock me, Kira said, but there was no real anger in her voice. If anything, she seemed curious about Elena's reaction. I'm sorry, Elena gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. It's just. We've been looking for intelligent alien life for centuries, and when we finally find it, she's afraid of processed cheese. Kira's lips twitched upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Your people have strange priorities. You can create food from nothing, but you make it taste like sadness and false hope. That's, actually a pretty accurate description of replicated food, Elena admitted. For a moment, something shifted in the air between them. The defiance in Kira's posture softened slightly, and Elena felt as though she was seeing the real person beneath the warrior's facade. Then the ship shuddered again, and the moment was broken. The storm won't last much longer, Elena said, checking her tablet. The dampening fields will be back online soon. Kira's expression hardened. And then you'll put me back to sleep. Study me like an insect pinned to a board. I won't let that happen, Elena said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. Your thoughts say you mean that, Kira said slowly, but they also say you may not have a choice. She moved closer, and Elena caught a scent like ozone and midnight air. Why should I trust you, Dr. Elena Vasquez? Elena met her gaze steadily. Because right now, I'm the only friend you have on this ship. Kira stared at her for a long moment, those remarkable eyes shifting through a spectrum of colors Elena didn't have names for. Finally, she spoke, and her voice held a note of something that might have been hope. Then we are both in more trouble than either of us realizes. The lights flickered back to full power, and the emergency klaxon fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, Elena could hear boots on deck plating, security coming to check on their valuable specimen. She looked at Kira, who had tensed at the sound, ready to fight or flee. Trust me, Elena said quietly. Kira's ears twitched, and she tilted her head as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, to Elena's amazement, she curled up in the corner of the medical bed, closing her eyes and arranging herself in a convincing approximation of unconsciousness. I am still not your pet, she murmured without opening her eyes, but there was something almost affectionate in her tone. Elena smiled despite everything, settling into her chair just as the security team arrived. Elena discovered that having a telepathic alien aboard a research vessel was roughly equivalent to living with a particularly sarcastic parrot that could also hack into your personal files. 3 days into their journey to Titan 7, Kira had managed to turn the ship's universal translator into what could only be described as a multilingual stand-up comedian with a serious attitude problem. Attention crew, the ship's AI announced during the morning briefing, atmospheric pressure remains stable, you offspring of a three-headed growled. Captain Morrison choked on his coffee. What did it just call us? Elena glanced toward the containment bay's monitors, where she could see Kira sitting cross-legged on her bed, looking far too pleased with herself. I believe that's a Sci-Fi term of endearment. It sounded more like an insult, Dr. Rodriguez muttered. With Kira, those tend to be the same thing, Elena replied, making a mental note to have another conversation with their guest about appropriate computer interaction. The translation issues had started 2 days ago when Kira had grown bored with Elena's attempts to teach her about human culture through old Earth documentaries. During a particularly dry segment about agricultural development, she had somehow interfaced her bioelectric abilities with the entertainment system, causing every screen on the ship to simultaneously display what appeared to be an alien sitcom featuring creatures that looked like ambulatory houseplants arguing about proper soil pH levels. "Your people's entertainment lacks proper dramatic tension," Kira had informed Elena afterward. "Where are the death-defying acrobatics? The philosophical debates conducted while hanging upside down from crystalline formations? This, friends, program you showed me is merely humans sitting in the same location, consuming heated bean water and discussing their reproductive anxieties." Elena had tried to explain that not all entertainment needed to involve mortal peril, but Kira had simply stared at her with those color-shifting eyes, currently a skeptical shade of teal, and declared human recreational activities tragically gravity-bound. The real trouble began when Kira decided to improve the universal translator by adding what she called proper contextual nuance to its vocabulary database. The result was that routine ship announcements now sounded like they were being delivered by a cosmic comedian with a grudge against conventional syntax. "Dr. Vasquez to Containment Bay 7, Elena called over the intercom. "Acknowledged, you fragrant blossom of questionable scientific methodology," the AI responded cheerfully. Elena rubbed her temples. At this rate, they'd reach Titan 7 with a crew suffering from collective linguistic trauma. She found Kira practicing what appeared to be some form of aerial meditation, floating in a perfect lotus position 3 feet above her bed. The sight never failed to amaze Elena. The Sci-Fi ability to manipulate gravitational fields on a personal level was theoretically impossible according to human physics, yet here was Kira treating Newton's laws like mere suggestions. "You've been busy," Elena said, settling into her usual chair. "Your ship's computer was desperately in need of personality enhancement," Kira replied without opening her eyes. "It had all the charm of a mathematical equation with anxiety issues. Captain Morrison is threatening to put you in a Faraday cage if you don't stop improving our systems." Kira's eyes snapped open, cycling through several colors before settling on an amused gold. "A Faraday cage? How charmingly primitive. I suppose next he'll suggest warding me off with iron filings and mumbled incantations." Elena couldn't help but smile. Despite the chaos, she'd grown to appreciate Kira's particular brand of sardonic humor. "He's not entirely wrong to be concerned. Yesterday you made the coffee maker start announcing brew strength in what sounded like ancient Mesopotamian poetry. I was adding cultural sophistication to your caffeine acquisition ritual," Kira said, lowering herself gracefully to the bed. "Your people approach coffee with all the reverence of ingesting maintenance fluid. Where is the ceremony? The acknowledgement of the bean's sacrifice? Most of us just want to wake up without falling over." "Tragic," Kira declared solemnly, then her expression grew more serious. "Your Captain Morrison dreams of promotions and publication credits. His thoughts taste like ambition wrapped in bureaucratic procedure." Elena shifted uncomfortably. She'd grown used to Kira's casual references to reading minds, but it still felt invasive. "Not everyone has ulterior motives." "No," Kira agreed, studying Elena with those unsettling eyes. "Some have motives that are refreshingly anterior. You think about my people, wonder about our worlds, our culture. But underneath all that scientific curiosity is something else." "Which is?" "Loneliness," Kira said simply. "You've spent so much time studying life from a distance that you've forgotten what it feels like to truly connect with another being." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's not, I mean, I have colleagues, friends." "Do you?" Kira tilted her head, those remarkable ears twitching slightly. "When did you last share a meal with someone whose company you genuinely enjoyed? When did you last laugh with abandon rather than professional courtesy?" Elena opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. The uncomfortable truth was that she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation that wasn't primarily focused on work or protocol. Your silence speaks louder than words, Kira said gently. It's why you spend so much time with me, despite the obvious professional complications. I'm the first truly novel thing you've encountered in years. You're certainly novel, Elena admitted. Yesterday I watched you interface with the ship's quantum processing core using nothing but bioelectric fields. According to everything I know about physics, that should have either killed you or created a small black hole. Physics, Kira said with a dismissive wave, is just another word for things we haven't figured out how to do yet. My people learned long ago that the universe is far more flexible than your equations suggest. How long ago? Kira's expression grew distant. We've been watching your world for approximately 3 of your centuries. Fascinating species, humans. You'll risk everything to save a single individual, then turn around and destroy entire ecosystems for convenience. You form emotional bonds with small furry creatures while simultaneously consuming other animals. You're walking contradictions wrapped in opposable thumbs. What made you want to study us? Study? Kira laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. We weren't studying you, Elena. We were trying to understand you. There's a significant difference. Elena frowned. I don't follow. Study implies clinical detachment, the assumption that the observer remains separate from the observed. Understanding requires empathy, connection, the willingness to be changed by what you encounter. Kira's eyes shifted to a deeper shade of gold. It's why I was exiled. Exiled? The Sci-Fi Council of Winds decreed that I had become too attached to your species. They said I was compromising our protocols of emotional neutrality. Kira's voice held a note of old pain. Apparently, finding humans endearingly ridiculous rather than simply ridiculous was considered a character flaw. Elena felt something twist in her chest. So when we found you on Kepler 442b, I was alone by design, not accident. Banished for the crime of caring too much about beings I was supposed to observe with scientific detachment. Kira's smile turned rueful. Ironic that I should end up as a specimen myself, wouldn't you say? The ship's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Vasquez, please report to the bridge, you methodical examiner of cosmic mysteries, the AI announced with suspicious warmth. Elena sighed. We really need to fix that translator. Why? Kira asked innocently. I think it's finally developing some personality. Much more interesting than the previous version, which had all the conversational skills of a particularly monotonous houseplant. A houseplant that didn't call the captain, Your Excellency, of dubious tactical decisions during yesterday's staff meeting. But much more accurate, Kira pointed out with a grin that was becoming increasingly familiar and increasingly dangerous to Elena's peace of mind. As Elena headed for the door, she paused. Kira. Why are you telling me all this? Those remarkable eyes met hers, cycling through colors that seemed to reflect emotions Elena was only beginning to recognize. Because you asked. And because you're the first human who's looked at me and seen a person rather than a puzzle to be solved. Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity and everything to do with the growing realization that somewhere between the sarcastic AI announcements and philosophical discussions about coffee rituals, she'd started to care about the silver-haired being with the impossible ears and the laugh like music. It was, she reflected as she headed to the bridge, either the best or worst thing that could have happened to her career. Probably both. The Meridian decided to have what Captain Morrison diplomatically called a mechanical tantrum, at precisely 0347 hours, when most of the crew was either deeply asleep or deeply regretting their late-night synthetic alcohol consumption. Elena was jolted awake by the peculiar sensation of her coffee mug floating past her face like a caffeinated satellite, followed immediately by her tablet, 3 data pads, and what appeared to be a very confused sock. Computer, status report, she called out, grabbing for her tablet as it drifted by. Gravity generator experiencing cascade failure, the AI replied in Kira's newly enhanced voice. All personnel are now free-floating cosmic dust motes of questionable decision-making abilities. Please prepare for extended weightlessness while we contemplate our engineering inadequacies. Elena groaned. Even in crisis situations, Kira's linguistic improvements managed to make everything sound like performance art. She pushed off from her bed and floated toward the door, grateful for the zero-gravity training that had seemed so pointless during her academy days. In the corridor, she encountered Chief Engineer Patel attempting to swim through the air with all the grace of a panicked walrus. "Dr. Vasquez," he called out, spinning helplessly. "Thank the stars you're here. We need someone small enough to access the quantum flux regulators through the maintenance shafts. The primary access panels are completely blocked by debris from the cascade failure." "How small are we talking?" "About the size of, well, you. Or your alien friend." The crawlways were designed by engineers who apparently thought humans were naturally serpentine. Elena's mind immediately went to Kira. In zero gravity, the Scifistory woman's natural grace would be even more pronounced. What exactly needs to be done? The quantum flux matrix needs manual recalibration. It's delicate work. One wrong move and we could end up as a very stylish cloud of subatomic particles scattered across 3 parsecs. That's oddly specific. I've had nightmares, Patel admitted. 20 minutes later, Elena found herself floating outside Containment Bay 7 with a toolkit that looked like it had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against user-friendly interfaces. The door hissed open to reveal Kira performing what could only be described as aerial ballet, spinning and gliding through the weightless space with movements so fluid they made Elena's heart do uncomfortable acrobatics. "Ah, the gravity-bound doctor arrives," Kira said, executing a perfect pirouette that brought her face to face with Elena. "I take it your ship has decided to embrace the cosmic dance of weightlessness. Our gravity generator is having what Chief Patel calls an existential crisis. We need to crawl through maintenance tunnels that were apparently designed by sadistic contortionists to fix quantum regulators before we all become space dust." "How delightfully perilous," Kira said, her eyes shifting to an excited shade of silver. "I was beginning to think this journey would lack proper death-defying adventure. You're enjoying this?" "Immensely. Your people spend so much energy fighting against the natural state of the universe. Finally, you get to experience true freedom of movement." Kira demonstrated by doing a slow-motion somersault that would have made Olympic gymnasts weep with envy. Elena couldn't help but smile despite their predicament. "Can you help us fix it?" "Can I help?" Kira looked genuinely offended. "I can interface with quantum systems that your finest engineers need entire control panels to access. I can perceive electromagnetic fields the way you perceive colors. The real question is whether you can keep up with me." They made their way to the maintenance access, which turned out to be an opening barely wide enough for Elena's shoulders and apparently designed by someone who thought humans were naturally boneless. Elena went first, pulling herself along guide rails while trying not to think about the fact that several layers of hull plating were the only things separating them from the vacuum of space. "This is cozy," Kira's voice echoed behind her, sounding far too cheerful for someone navigating a tunnel that would give claustrophobic nightmares to a hamster. The builders clearly had a very optimistic view of human flexibility, Elena grunted, squeezing around a particularly tight corner. "Or a very pessimistic view of human survival instincts. Who designs a crucial system that requires potential death crawling to access? Probably the same people who put the emergency manual overrides in places you need to dislocate your shoulder to reach," Elena replied, then immediately regretted speaking as she tried to navigate around a junction that seemed to have been designed for beings with retractable ribcages. Behind her, Kira moved with liquid grace, somehow managing to flow around obstacles that Elena had to fight with. "Your people have such a strange relationship with their environment. You build these magnificent ships, then design them as if you expect your crew to evolve into more convenient shapes. We prefer to call it adaptive engineering," Elena said, then yelped as her toolkit caught on a protruding conduit. Is that what you call it when I watch you try to squeeze through an opening that would challenge a particularly ambitious snake? They reached the quantum flux chamber, a spherical cavity barely large enough for two people to float without constantly bumping into each other. The walls were covered with crystalline matrices that pulsed with soft blue light, creating patterns that seemed to shift just beyond the edge of perception. Beautiful, Kira breathed, her eyes reflecting the quantum patterns. Your engineers may lack spatial reasoning skills, but they understand the aesthetics of controlled energy flow. Elena pulled out her scanner and immediately frowned at the readings. The flux variance is worse than I thought. We're going to have to recalibrate each matrix individually. Show me what needs to be done. Elena began explaining the process, but quickly realized that Kira was absorbing the information at a rate that made speed reading look leisurely. More impressively, she seemed to understand the underlying principles intuitively. Your people use such crude interfaces, Kira said, extending her hand toward one of the matrices. Her fingertips began to glow with soft bioluminescence, and Elena watched in fascination as the crystal responded, its pulsing pattern shifting to match the rhythm of Kira's bioelectric field. That should take 15 minutes with our tools, Elena said, awed. Tools are for species that haven't learned to speak directly to their technology, Kira replied, moving to the next matrix. Though I admit, your quantum engineering has a certain elegant brutality to it. Very human, effective despite being unnecessarily complicated. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, Elena handling the mechanical adjustments while Kira interfaced directly with the quantum systems. Elena found herself stealing glances at her companion, marveling at the casual way she manipulated forces that human science barely understood. You're staring, Kira said without looking away from her work. You're fascinating, Elena replied honestly, then felt heat rise in her cheeks. From a scientific perspective, I mean. Of course, Kira said, but Elena caught a smile in her voice. Though I must say, your thoughts have become considerably less clinical over the past few days. You can read my thoughts right now. Your emotions are quite loud, even for a human. Curiosity, admiration, and something else. Kira's voice trailed off, and Elena saw her ears twitch in what she'd learned was a sign of surprise. Something else? Before Kira could answer, one of the matrices flared brilliantly. Elena instinctively reached out to adjust the stabilizer, but the sudden burst of energy feedback sent her spinning. She hit the chamber wall harder than expected, and pain shot through her shoulder as something made an unpleasant grinding sound. Elena. Kira was beside her instantly, those remarkable hands steady and gentle as they checked for injury. Your shoulder is displaced. Dislocated, Elena corrected through gritted teeth. Standard occupational hazard for xenobiologists who spend too much time in maintenance tunnels designed by vengeful architects. This will hurt, Kira warned, then before Elena could protest, she grasped Elena's arm and shoulder with sure movements. There was a sharp pop, followed by blessed relief. Better? Kira asked, but she didn't move away. They floated there in the soft quantum light, faces inches apart, and Elena became acutely aware that Kira's hands were still on her shoulders. Better, Elena whispered, looking into those color-shifting eyes that had somehow become the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Your thoughts, Kira said softly, are no longer scientific at all. No, Elena agreed, they're not. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of time and space, they simply looked at each other. Then the ship's intercom crackled to life. Flux regulators show green across the board, you magnificent manipulators of subatomic mysteries, the AI announced cheerfully. Gravity restoration in 30 seconds. They broke apart just as Elena felt weight returning to her body. Kira landed with feline grace while Elena managed something closer to a controlled crash. We should get back, Elena said, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with nearly becoming cosmic dust. Yes, Kira agreed, but she was looking at Elena with an expression that suggested their conversation was far from over. As they made their way back through the maintenance tunnels, considerably easier now that gravity was pulling them in predictable directions, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. The dangerous proximity, the shared crisis, the moment when Kira had touched her with such careful tenderness, it had shifted the dynamic of their relationship into uncharted territory. "Kira?" Elena said as they reached the main corridor. "Yes. Thank you. For helping." "For." Elena gestured vaguely, unsure how to articulate the complex emotions swirling through her. Kira smiled, and for once it was entirely without sarcasm or defensive humor. "Thank you for trusting me with something that mattered." As they parted ways, Elena heading to the bridge to file her report and Kira returning to her quarters, Elena realized that somewhere between the malfunctioning gravity and the quantum light, she'd stopped thinking of Kira as a specimen to be studied. She was thinking of her as someone worth knowing. Someone worth protecting. Someone who was becoming dangerously important to her in ways that had absolutely nothing to do with xenobiology and everything to do with the way her heart had stopped when she thought Kira might be hurt. It was, Elena reflected as she floated down the corridor, either the best or the most complicated development of her entire career. Knowing her luck, it was probably both. Titan 7 research station hung in Saturn's gravitational embrace like a metallic snowflake, its crystalline modules catching and refracting the distant sun's light in patterns that would have made a kaleidoscope jealous. Elena pressed her face to the observation deck window, watching the station grow larger as the meridian approached docking, and tried to ignore the knot of dread forming in her stomach. "Magnificent view," Kira said, floating up beside her with that casual disregard for conventional movement that Elena had grown to find both amazing and mildly irritating. "Your people certainly know how to build impressive monuments to their own ambitions." "Director Hayes is waiting for us," Elena said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Ah, the infamous Director Hayes." Kira's eyes shifted to a knowing shade of copper. "The one whose thoughts taste like stale coffee and bureaucratic satisfaction. I take it our arrival is the highlight of his career." Elena winced. "He's been planning this moment for months. A genuine alien specimen to study, catalog, and..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Dissect?" Kira supplied helpfully. "Probe? Reduce to component elements for the advancement of human knowledge? I won't let that happen. Your determination is admirable, but your authority is limited." Kira's voice was gentle, but Elena heard the resignation beneath it. "Besides, perhaps it's time I stopped running from what I am. What you are is a person, not a specimen. To you, yes. To Director Hayes and his team, I'm the discovery that will secure their funding for the next decade." Kira performed a graceful spin in the zero gravity, her silver hair creating a momentary aurora around her head. "Your species has a saying about making the best of bad situations, doesn't it?" The docking procedure went smoothly, which Elena took as a bad omen. In her experience, things only went according to plan when the universe was saving up its chaos for something truly spectacular. Director Hayes met them at the airlock with a smile that could have powered a small fusion reactor and an entourage of technicians who looked at Kira the way a child might look at the universe's most fascinating toy. "Dr. Vasquez, outstanding work." Hayes pumped Elena's hand with enthusiasm that bordered on the manic. "And this must be our guest. Remarkable. The ear structure, the bone density readings, the bioelectric emanations, absolutely fascinating." Kira tilted her head, studying Hayes with the same intensity he was showing her. "Your director has very loud thoughts," she murmured to Elena. "Also, he apparently dreams about having a research facility named after him. The Hayes Institute for Xenological Studies. Catchy." Elena bit back a laugh despite everything. Even facing what amounted to scientific imprisonment, Kira couldn't resist commentary on human psychology. "If you'll come this way," Hayes continued, gesturing toward the main laboratory complex, "we've prepared specialized accommodations and a comprehensive testing schedule. Nothing invasive, of course, just thorough documentation of your unique physiological characteristics." Of course, Kira agreed pleasantly, then added in a voice only Elena could hear, "I particularly enjoy the way he says, 'nothing invasive,' while thinking about tissue samples and neural mapping." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical scanners, cognitive tests, and what Hayes euphemistically called voluntary cooperation protocols. Elena watched from the observation gallery as Kira submitted to procedure after procedure with a grace that made Elena's heart ache. This wasn't submission, it was a conscious choice to endure indignity for reasons Elena couldn't fathom. Remarkable adaptability, Dr. Chen, Hayes had apparently recruited half the xenobiology department, observed as Kira demonstrated her bioelectric abilities for the 5th time. The neural pathways show integration patterns we've never seen in any terrestrial species. Because we're not terrestrial, Kira pointed out reasonably. We're also not laboratory equipment, despite current evidence to the contrary. Elena had reached her breaking point. She stood abruptly, heading for the lab floor, but Hayes intercepted her at the door. "Dr. Vasquez, where are you going? This has gone far enough. She's not a specimen to be poked and prodded. She's the greatest scientific discovery in human history," Hayes replied firmly. "A few days of testing is a small price for the advancement of our understanding." A few days. The schedule shows 3 weeks of comprehensive evaluation. Hayes had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Science requires thoroughness. Elena pushed past him, but stopped when she heard Kira's voice calling her name. Through the observation window, she could see her friend, and when had she started thinking of her as a friend rather than a subject, gesturing for her to wait. "It's all right, Elena," Kira said, her voice carrying clearly through the intercom. "I have an idea." For the next hour, Elena watched in amazement as Kira turned the tables on her supposed captors. Instead of passively submitting to tests, she began demonstrating abilities that left the entire research team speechless. She interfaced directly with the station's central computer, speaking to it in languages of pure mathematics and electromagnetic harmonics. She showed them how SciFi biointegration worked, not by allowing them to study her, but by teaching them to understand the principles behind it. "Your people approach consciousness like it's something separate from the universe around you," Kira explained to the assembled scientists. "We learned long ago that awareness is simply another form of energy, capable of direct interaction with other energy systems. You're saying consciousness can interface directly with technology?" Dr. Chen asked, his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "I'm saying consciousness can interface directly with everything, if you know how to listen." Kira's eyes met Elena's through the observation window. "It's how I know that Dr. Vasquez's concern for my well-being isn't entirely professional anymore." Elena felt her cheeks burn as every scientist in the room turned to look at her. "It's also how I know," Kira continued, "that none of you truly want to cause me harm. You want to understand, which is a very different thing. So let me offer you something better than test results." She extended her hand toward Elena. "Come here." Elena joined her in the center of the lab, acutely aware of the dozen pairs of eyes watching them. Kira took her hands, and Elena felt the familiar electric tingle of contact. "Close your eyes," Kira said softly. "Let me show you how we really communicate." The world exploded into sensation. Elena felt herself connected not just to Kira, but to the entire station, every computer system, every life support monitor, every quantum processor humming with contained energy. But more than that, she felt Kira's emotions, her memories, her genuine affection for this strange human who had treated her as a person rather than a puzzle. The connection lasted only moments, but when Elena opened her eyes, she understood. The other scientists were staring at the readouts, watching neural activity patterns that shouldn't have been possible. "This is what true interspecies communication looks like," Kira announced. "Not one species studying another, but two species learning to speak the same language." Hayes was practically vibrating with excitement. "The applications, the possibilities, we could revolutionize everything from computer interfaces to deep space communications." "You could," Kira agreed. "But only if you approach it as partnership rather than exploitation." Elena squeezed Kira's hands, understanding finally why she had submitted to the testing. It hadn't been surrender, it had been strategy. By demonstrating her abilities on her own terms, she had transformed herself from subject to teacher. 3 hours later, Elena sat in her assigned quarters, reviewing the day's events and trying to process the fact that her entire understanding of consciousness, communication, and her own feelings had been revolutionized in the span of an afternoon. The interspecies cooperation protocols that Kira had proposed would change everything, not just for human science, but for the possibility of genuine contact with other intelligent species. A soft chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Kira standing in the doorway, no longer wearing the sterile research facility clothing but her own garments, somehow retrieved from the Meridian. More importantly, she was there voluntarily, no escort, no containment protocols. "They're treating you as a guest now," Elena observed. "Consultant, actually. Apparently my insights into biotechnological integration are considered invaluable to the advancement of human scientific understanding." Kira's voice held gentle mockery. "Also, Director Hayes has offered me a position as interspecies communications coordinator. Are you going to take it?" Kira moved further into the room, studying the view of Saturn through Elena's window. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain xenobiologist thinks there might be room in her research for a permanent partner rather than a temporary subject." Elena felt her heart do something complicated and wonderful. "I think that xenobiologist would consider herself the luckiest scientist in the galaxy." Kira smiled, that genuine expression Elena had learned to treasure. "In that case, I believe I'll accept their offer." Elena patted the couch beside her. "Want to help me review the cooperation protocols?" Instead of sitting beside her, Kira moved to stand in front of Elena's chair. "I have something to say first." "What's that?" "I'm not your pet," Kira said solemnly, those remarkable eyes shifting through shades of gold and silver. Elena laughed, remembering their first encounter what felt like a lifetime ago. "I never thought you were." "Good," Kira replied, then with a fluid movement that somehow managed to be both graceful and endearingly uncertain, she curled up in Elena's lap, tucking her head against Elena's shoulder. "Because this is entirely voluntary." Elena wrapped her arms around her, marveling at how perfectly Kira fit against her, how natural this felt despite being completely unprecedented in her experience. Through the window, Saturn's rings caught the distant sunlight, creating patterns of beauty that paled in comparison to the wonder of holding someone who had chosen to trust her completely. "Comfortable?" Elena asked softly. Kira murmured against her shoulder. "Though I should warn you, this position offers me an excellent vantage point for reading your thoughts." "And what am I thinking?" "That you never expected to find home in the middle of space, in the arms of an alien with questionable taste in computer programming." Elena smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Kira's silver head. "You're right. I never expected that at all." Outside their window, the universe spun on in its eternal dance, but for the first time in her career, Elena wasn't thinking about the vast mysteries waiting to be discovered. She was thinking about the mystery she held in her arms, the one who had chosen her, the one who had transformed from specimen to friend to something infinitely more precious. It was, she reflected, the most important discovery of her life.